The latest data on the US labor market and consumer sentiment paints a troubling picture, one that suggests Americans are growing increasingly anxious about the economy, their jobs, and their personal finances. First, I will walk you through the latest deteriorating consumer sentiment reading, and then we will focus on the bigger issue: massive job cuts across the United States. According to the University of Michigan's preliminary November report, consumer sentiment fell sharply to 50.3. This is the lowest level since June of 2022, the last time confidence was this low. Inflation was running hot and recession fears were dominating the headlines. You might recall that. So what's behind the steep drop now? I have already commented on this over on my Telegram, by the way. I post there throughout a day. I'm very active there, and you're welcome to give me a follow. I would love to see you there. But I want to emphasize that there is a mix of factors right now, from the historic government shutdown, which I discussed in great detail in a recent video, to persistent inflation, and now a wave of corporate layoffs. These very concerning factors combined are shaking Americans' confidence in the economy. The report shows that a measure of current economic conditions plunged over 6 points to 52.3, marking a record low as worries about the shutdown and job security intensified. And it wasn't just one demographic that felt the pinch. The decline in sentiment was very broad-based, cutting across age, income, and political lines. Consumers are clearly feeling squeezed, and despite President Trump's and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's recent statements, they tried to assure us that the U.S. economy is booming and inflation is low, which, by the way, let me know if you agree with that. Is that what you're seeing when you go shopping? Let me know in the comments below. But the consumers are not buying it. Spontaneous mentions of high price increases for the 5th consecutive month dominated the survey results. And also the survey found that expectations for near-term inflation tick up again. So to sum it up, it is absolutely clear that U.S. consumers feel intense pressure on their personal finances from multiple directions at this time. And those pressures are visible everywhere. A measure of personal finances fell to a 6-year low, while buying conditions for big-ticket goods such as cars, furniture, and appliances are now the worst they've been since mid-2022. So the message is very clear. In other words, Americans are holding back, and clearly it's not because they believe the U.S. economy will improve. On the contrary, they're expecting a bigger downturn based on the results of the most recent survey. Adding to the anxiety are growing fears about job security. According to the survey, 71% of respondents now expect unemployment to rise in the coming year. This is more than double the share from a year ago. In other words, 7 out of 10 Americans think the job market is about to weaken, and they may not be wrong. Just this week, a separate report from Challenger Gray and Christmas revealed that U.S. employers announced over 153,000 job cuts in October. This is a staggering 175% increase from the same month last year. Seeing that type of an increase, or rather a spike, on a year-over-year basis is quite bad news. This is a major red flag. And it makes, of course, this the worst October for layoffs since 2003. In total, U.S. firms have now announced over 1 million job cuts in the first 10 months of 2025. 1 million job cuts in the first 10 months of 2025. Think about that. The year isn't even over yet. That number has already surpassed last year's total by nearly 45%. Technology companies are leading the charge, but warehousing, retail, and even manufacturing are also being hit. Job cuts in retail is very telling, in my opinion. It is a sign that consumer demand may have slowed considerably more than the official data is telling us, and associated costs have risen to the point where businesses have to cut operational costs. Companies are blaming cost-cutting measures, of course, as they typically do, and it is true. They have to face very, very significant price increases. They're also blaming weak consumer spending and the rapid adoption of AI. Just as cell phones transformed the job market 2 decades ago, AI is now disrupting industries at an even faster pace. There is an AI bubble, and I recently uploaded an entire video about the upcoming bubble burst associated with the valuations of AI-related companies. So make sure that you watch that video next if you're interested to learn more. Andy Challenger, for example, the firm's chief revenue officer, here explained it this way: some sectors are correcting after the hiring boom of the pandemic, while AI adoption and rising costs are forcing companies to tighten their belts. He also warned that those laid off today are having a harder time finding new roles very, very quickly. So I think that means that we should expect unemployment to rise if this trend continues, which likely it will. The list of major companies cutting jobs reads like a who's who of corporate America. Amazon is slashing 14,000 positions. Target is cutting 1,800 corporate roles, and Paramount Skydance has laid off about 1,000 workers. UPS eliminated 34,000 operational jobs this year, and of course, there are more companies that are going through the same process. Even long-established brands like Starbucks, Delta Airlines, and CarMax have announced reductions in their salaried workforce. So these cuts are, of course, signaling a shift in how companies are planning for the future. They cut costs to, of course, to reduce operational expenses because they don't anticipate an increase in demand for a variety of reasons, because consumers are worried, and so they're cutting on their spending. In addition to that, we have to consider the impact of the government shutdown too. It has become the longest in U.S. history, and key federal agencies remain closed at this time, and the crucial labor data for September and for October have not been released yet. It means that economists and policymakers are essentially flying blind, if you will. They're forced to rely on private reports like ADP's payroll data and the report that I just quoted earlier in this video to see what's really happening in the economy. But when Fed Chair Jerome Powell recently said that the labor market was only showing a very gradual cooling, those were his words, very gradual cooling, many economists and even ordinary Americans, I saw that in your comments too, raised an eyebrow, because the reality on the ground actually looks much, much harsher than that, as you can tell, and as you tell me in your comments, and I keep saying that, but I do read your comments, and although I can't respond to every single one of you, I do appreciate you engaging with the content. So this mix of economic uncertainty, high living costs, and job insecurity is a recipe for declining consumer sentiment, and that's exactly what we're seeing. The timing couldn't really be worse. Consumer spending accounts for roughly 70% of the US economy, meaning when Americans pull back, the entire economy feels it. If confidence continues to deteriorate, it could deepen the slowdown that quite clearly has already begun. Whether this turns into something more serious will depend on how quickly consumer confidence and jobs can recover. But one thing is very certain at this time. Right now, American consumers are very nervous, and that nervousness could soon ripple through every corner of our economy. If you're in the United States, please let me know if you relate to these fears. Let me know what you think. What are your thoughts on where the economy